Seth,
Yes.
welcome.
Hello, Leo. How's your country?
How's your country?
I asked you. Okay, my country is probably a lot like your country, but not as tight. We can still go to, Idaho and stretch out and not feel it. You don't have an Idaho over there in your little New Jersey-sized country, so I
It's
imagine
true.
it's
I don't
hotter over
know.
there.
Yeah, I don't know why we have to copy all the bad things from America and none of the good things. Well, some of the good things maybe. I'm not sure because they actually wanted to copy some elements of the legal system and look what that, from America and look what that where that brought us. So I don't know that this is the solution either. But yes, the streets are ablaze a
I remember
bit.
you and I were down there for Occupy Wall Street. Remember that?
Oh, of course.
Okay, so that was an
But
interesting
yeah,
moment in
but that
time.
was that was much more social,
Innocent
uh,
now when you think back to it.
innocent, fun. Also, it was very clear. It was like the downtrodden, the people versus the CEO of Wall Street, and
But I think why I'm pointing it out is because on the ground it felt like one thing, but then once you started getting into it a little bit, you realized that there was some people funding the thing behind the scenes, and and
that's always the case because it's very hard to get people off the couch, but once they're off, everybody wants to, hey, all right, let's use that energy. We talked about it, I think, in one of our podcasts. But that's not the thing that concerns me. What concerns me is the fact that right now it's not some like David versus Goliath, the rich versus the poor versus the rich, or some really some like a real ideology. This is really half the people against the other half. A lot of ignorance in the air. Nobody really. If you talk to people about the facts, they don't know the facts. They're just angry, frustrated, and it's coming to the surface. And
Mm.
that's what we're seeing. That's what I'm seeing, at least. So,
That's
um,
important actually. That it's a shame that there's not enough education, but the emotion, right? It doesn't matter if you're sitting in a big mansion and have all the sports cars and whatever. When you feel empty inside,
yeah,
none of that matters, right? So on the one hand, there's things to talk about. People aren't really clear about what to talk about, but what is clear is people feel inside uh, unfulfilled, disappointed, and when people feel like that, they're looking for a reason why. Obviously, some people behind the scenes are taking advantage of that and putting a boogeyman face um,
that's the other
on it.
thing that's really annoying me. It's one thing if we were like, if this is like, this is our thing, and we gotta, we're fighting it out, and you get like a little, like a little. We don't have street fights in Israel. We have now, but we used to have beach fights in Israel, or poolside fights. Like two families would like take their sandals off and start beating each other up, and and plastic chairs. It was that kind of thing, and you kind of like settled it between the people. But now it feels like there's people on the outside stoking the flames. You have
Yeah,
all
yeah,
the
yeah,
Arab
yeah.
countries like just sitting like on the in the bleachers and eating popcorn and waiting for for blood to spill, and you have sad to say a lot of forces from mostly from the left, I would say, that are very happy to see what's going on here. And I'm not being political. I don't really. It's not like I'm supporting one side over another. It's just what I'm seeing, and so I think this is not the first time that this has happened, and I hope maybe our guest today shed some light, and then also we can this we're not a political podcast. I hope that we can then kind of really shift into, okay, what can we do? How can we deal now? Even the left that we thought is our safe haven, our liberal, our human rights side. How did that get all distorted, and where does that leave us? What happened in the left? At least growing up, I thought that was like the place for any sensible Jew to be in.
People are looking for something deeper and more protective than liberalism has allowed.
I hear complaints against the Jews every day.
So it's not that we should stop having arguments. That's not what unity means. It's that we
Right.
should have arguments for the sake of heaven.
I want to get a little personal. Did you ever experience anti-Semitism?
You're looking for a scapegoat, and the Jew fits in so well.
We're not against anti-Semitism. We're against good connections between people.
He's author of Woke Antisemitism, How Progressive Ideology Harms Jews, longtime Jewish advocate and leader, and his name is David Bernstein.
The Jew saw them all, beat them all, and is now what he always was. All things are mortal but the Jew. All other forces pass, but he remains. What is the secret of his immortality?
I think it's been a long time coming. I think American Jews have for a long time genuinely identified with the left, because the civil rights movement, more than anything else, not only helped lift up Black Americans, but it gave Jews opportunities that we didn't have before. So we saw that our lot was connected to those that of other minority communities, and Jews still to this day feel a sort of kinship to our traditional civil rights partners. Now, whether they're genuine partners in every way today is a question that we need to discuss. But I think in general, that's where Jews saw their greatest sense of security. And they also looked at the right and the evangelical right and as sort of fundamentally hostile forces. I like to say that, who are the Cossacks? The Cossacks being the people who committed pogroms, not actually all the pogroms. That was very early on, but we like to think of the Cossacks as being the bad guys. Who are the Cossacks? I think for a long time we saw it as the political right in America. And I think we're going to have to sort of recondition ourselves to also look at elements of the political left as the Cossacks as well. So what happened there is what your question was. I'm just telling you it happened. Yeah. It happened for a long time. I mean, if you go back to even the late 1960s, there was this movement afoot. It was of a, and by the way, there were Jews involved in the movement. It was sort of a neo-Marxist movement to substitute culture for economic class. That was taking place in the universities, that saw oppression everywhere, that understood American society to be a fundamentally oppressive society that needed to be fundamentally restructured. And that movement took shape in universities, in ethnic studies departments at universities, in gender studies departments at universities. And, it sort of stayed there. And so most of us probably didn't pay much attention to it. But you started to see signs that it might be escaping the university in the form of political correctness, especially like in the 80s and 90s, you started to feel it. I certainly felt it as a college student in the mid to late 1980s. I was already seeing signs of this ideology sort of finding its way in society. And in the late 1990s, I remember I worked for an organization called the American Jewish Committee. And I sat through a multicultural day, and I thought I was going to love the multicultural day because I did multiculturalism. I built ties to other ethnic groups. I love that work. And all of a sudden, someone said the definition of racism, which I used to think meant bigotry toward another race, but they defined it as prejudice. Racism equals prejudice plus power. And I thought to myself, wait a second. So if you're a perceived powerful group, like Jews, that means that you can't be a victim. And if you're a perceived victimized group, that means you can't be a perpetrator. That's not good for us. And I wrote an article about that over 20 years ago, warning that if this idea catches on, it's going to be a source of anti-Semitism. And I warned my colleagues in the organization that I was starting to see signs of this ideology, this oppressed versus oppressor, this theory of power, gaining ground among many of our traditional partners in the civil rights movement. I thought this is going to become increasingly complicated for us. And in 2016, on the first day of my job as CEO of a Jewish advocacy umbrella organization that was mostly center-left, I myself am center-left, and I've been in center-left circles my entire career. The first day I wrote an article called the Anti-Israel Trend You've Never Heard of. And it was about intersectionality and how that idea, which is rooted in the same ideology we're talking about, was catching on and was being weaponized against Israel. And I said, if this continues, the pro-Israel community is going to be in trouble, and Israel's standing is going to become even more complicated in the United States. And that's exactly what happened. It spread like wildfire. So, of course, you get to 2020 and the death of George Floyd.
Can you define intersectionality just so it's clear?
Yeah. So the first article that was ever written was by a woman named Kimberly Crenshaw. And what she pointed out is if you are if a black person and a woman, you faced a kind of double jeopardy that there was a loophole in the law that didn't treat you as a protected class. In other words, you could either be protected as a woman or you could be protected as a black person, but you wouldn't get any protection as a black woman. And so she pointed this out, but that idea, which has some usefulness, was inflated into some kind of like grand theories, a grand axiom that explains all of reality. It became all the rage. I call it intersectionality fever, like starting in like the mid.
So like you get to rank like who's the most, like if you're gay and black and a woman, you're the most,
yes.
Right. Oh, so
Most oppressed. So this hierarchy of privilege that you're getting at, Seth, it's a very rigid structure, right? So at the top of the pyramid might be people who have multiple forms of privilege, like white, cis, male, right? And then toward the bottom are people who might be black and disabled and not and trans or what have you. And so that's obviously a very rigid way of looking at the world, right? It means that if you're black as a source of oppression, you're white, you're a source of privilege. If you're male, a source of privilege. If you're female, source of oppression. And it doesn't allow any nuance at all. So imagine you're a Jew and you're perceived as white. Whether you define yourself as white is another matter altogether. You're perceived as white. You're hyper white. You're on the upper echelons of privilege, and that becomes a source of anti-Semitism for us. And you really felt that start to take shape in the late 2019, early 2020, George Floyd, and so forth. And I think that that's become a source of anti-Semitism in multiple ways, and I could go into that more, but that's where I started to see this shift in political winds. And I think it's giving rise to left-wing anti-Semitism that's always been there, but it's like an accelerator. It's an accelerator of what already existed. These ideas about privilege and power and Israel's being a colonial state, those have been around a long time. But now that this ideology was sort of become domestic, becoming part of the corporate structure, becoming part of the nonprofit world, that was now an accelerant of that form of anti-Semitism that has always been part of the discussion.
So the thing that scares me is that, as you said, that it's always been there. It's true. And when we were looking at the history, Jews were always, I think, as you pointed out, we always leaned left because we thought if we kind of band with the other minorities, it will benefit us as well. And if we kind of promote human rights and civil rights and all that, that will be eventually good for us. And we kind of sort of the idealized state of that move, but of that play. But history shows that every time this happened, Jews ended up with their backs against the wall. This was the case in we saw it in Russia, we saw it in other places in the 1800s. We haven't learned anything. I mean,
well, I'm going to partially disagree with you, Leo.
Okay,
and that is that. Actually, the civil rights movement in its original form was great for the Jews. I mean, you could not get into the non-Jewish country club before then. You could not get into the non-Jewish law firm.
Yeah, no. Initially, It's amazing. I mean, when the Jews came out of their ghettos, their shtetls, and the Tsar invited them, hey, come to the universities, be part of social life. Everybody was happy. Like it smelled like progress. But in the end,
progress. It was progress. I mean, in other words, it was progress for Jews. I don't know about you, but my kid can go to any law firm they want now because of that. It's not just so there can be progress and there can be regression at the same time. And what I'm saying is what actually shifted was not that model of collaboration and cooperation makes no sense anymore. It's that the people who were once our partners or their progeny, down the line, have embraced an ideology that is illiberal. Jews, in other words, I would say that Jews do great in free countries, and by that I mean classically liberal countries where they can say what they want, they can argue, they can be part of the conversation. There are very few barriers. This is the barrier. That's what changed. That the very people we used to count as our friends adopted an ideology which is hostile to us, and a lot of people still haven't gotten the memo about that.
So
yeah.
It's a little bit, Leah. If this is not on the trend that you want to go, so just I'll park it for a while. But there's over 10 million Syrian refugees, for example, right? From what's going on in Syria over the last number of years. But I don't hear a fraction of people complaining. I mean, almost nothing. I hear almost nothing about it, but I hear complaints against the Jews every day. So the people who were our advocates or our friends and are not now, what is it that is making them so stuck on this one issue? There's so many problems. You know, you go to Boko Haram. I mean, there's so many serious other issues where millions of people are displaced or tens of thousands of people are killed. So why did these people who were our friends, why are they so adamant about this one issue? Why are they so pushing on this one button?
Yeah, because Israel's hyper white too. Look, in their mental map of the world, which is very rigid, right? It tells you exactly who has privilege and who's oppressed and the like. The issue of Syrian refugees doesn't map well. It doesn't fit on their map. In their map, a country that like Syria shouldn't be a perpetrator.
You need a white perpetrator, basically, is what you're saying.
Yeah, white perpetrators are people who map and white and people of color who are victims map. So Jews who are perceived as sort of the penultimate colonizers, or Israel being an expression of European colonization in the Middle East, maps in the oppression map, and Palestinians who are considered people of color map on the oppressed map. And so you have to understand that's the whole thing. It's a very rigid worldview. And because of its rigidity, because of its dogma begets more radical forms of dogma. It's constantly trying to outdo itself. No, and that's the rigidity itself is what creates the anti-Semitism.
No, I think that this part is very clear, and you can see it. My question is that it seems like when I look back on history and the places where Jews were a minority in a country, and a country that was somewhat, if not hostile to Jews, at least was very much, isolating the Jews and not letting them be a part of, as you said, of the social discourse, of the economy and everything. And then there's a process of sort of an emancipation of sorts, or somehow Jews find a way to, I'll just, I'll convert externally, like in Spain, right? Or I'll do something, I'll find a way to join to join
America. I'll work on Friday,
whatever it is. Like, so Jews find a way to either, elevate the country a little bit or be more like, or assimilate, for lack of a better word. Yeah. But then somehow it eventually it blows up in their face in the end. I see it repeatedly in many places. So I'm asking you now a more systemic question. What is the end game, or rather, why is this keep happening? Like it seems like we're on the right track. We're bringing more liberties. We're bringing more this, more open civil discourse, and yet somehow in the end it kind of flips on us. What's the story there? Do you think?
You could look at it as from the standpoint of the Jews and what we've experienced through history, but you could also look at it in the trajectory of societies themselves. There are people who say we're in a state of late stage liberalism, right? That the liberal proposition that gave so much unparalleled freedom to people is now sort of collapsing on itself. And there are people who are arguing that it's collapsing on itself, that so much freedom ultimately leads to certain people being so free that they feel disenfranchised from society, and that we're entering a period where we have such disenfranchisement on all political sides that people are looking for something deeper and more protective than liberalism has allowed. And so it's really the trajectory of liberalism that is the problem potentially here. And that, I think if you looked at the early part of the 20th century in America, and you guys are history guys, there were all kinds of ideologies like Marxism and capitalism and fascism and blah, 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 blah. And if you look today, I think we're going through one of those periods again, where we're in this stage of history where people can't make sense of the world anymore. So they're looking for very simplistic explanations for why there's so much disarray, why some people seem so rich and privileged, and why other people seem to have nothing. And what's explaining all that, right? So rather than sort of think through it in a very rationalist way, they seek out simplistic dogmas and conspiracy theories. And in those, embedded in those conspiracy theories and dogmas and simplistic explanations is anti-Semitism. Very
Somebody with a
frequently,
big nose.
somebody with a big nose. Yeah, exactly. Because it's on the shelf. Like it never left the shelf.
Right.
You know, the idea of the Jew as controlling everything behind the scenes, that's never ceased to be part of.
Oh, so David, we always bring this up. Just as an, like, let's just make an aside for a second. We could say that Jews do run a lot of the, logically and factually, Jews are very involved in finance. Jews are very involved in media. Jews are very involved in law. Jews are very involved in medicine, right? So just to say that Jews are involved in that, that's not really a problem.
That they control it. That doesn't mean that they control everything either.
Okay.
I mean, there are a lot of Jews in Hollywood, as Dave Chappelle reminded us, but that doesn't mean that they're all sitting around in shul coordinating their efforts about what kind of movies to make.
Okay.
No,
That's
however,
the fallacy of it.
however, but here's a counterpoint that we often ask, and I ask myself because I'm also a digital creator, so I'm kind of connected to the world, the entertainment world, and everything. If Hollywood is one of this huge machine disseminating values throughout the world, and people have a problem with the values that it's disseminating, do they have the right to point at the people who are sitting there? Whether it's a conspiratorial thing or not, it's motivated by personal interests or not, whatever it is, do you have a right to say it?
It's a category area. It's a category error. It's not because it's not the Satmar Rebbe's not the one who's calling the shots in Hollywood, right? It's not Jews who live in southern Israel who are calling the shots. I mean, Jews
that's
are not
true.
a monolith.
No, that's you're right. I mean, that's a different issue that we're seeing, that we're always judged collectively, and that's a whole other thing, as you said, as a monolith. But that's a different question, and we can ask, why is that? Even though we're such a hodgepodge of people, and we ourselves can't seem to agree on, two Jews can't agree on one thing, and yet here we are. We're almost like forced to, hey, we're judging you all as one piece. It doesn't matter what you think, what you do, what you did, you converted, doesn't matter. You're still getting on the train, right? It's like, why is that? Do you think?
Yeah, look, everybody to a degree believes in stereotypes, but the difference between a bigot and a non-bigot is the bigot thinks it's always true. A bigot thinks that the stereotype is always true, makes no exceptions, can't see any nuance, can't see complications. And I think these ideologies that we're talking about, whether it's a right-wing ideology like the Great Replacement theory, that Jews are bringing in all these immigrants to replace ordinary Americans and the like, these are grand simplifications of complex phenomena, right?
Sure.
And so you're looking for a scapegoat, you're looking for the Jew fits in so well, and no matter what your simple explanation is, because we've always been around there for that purpose. One of my colleagues, Pamela Peresky, likes to say that when whiteness in America, when the idea of being white, a white person, was considered a moral good, Jews weren't white. We were the enemy of white people. When whiteness is considered an unmitigated moral evil, Jews are white. So we're easy to sort of insert in narrative, right? Like insert in the story.
So this is an important point here that you've brought up already, I think, a few times, and that is, regardless of what the facts are, there's an emotion inside of people that they'll just put any story on top of the emotion, and the emotion seems like we're constantly dealing with the facts. Like, don't you see we're humanitarians? Don't you see an Arab can be elected to the Knesset? Don't you see that we're give a lot of charity, but it doesn't matter because there's an inner feeling that keeps that's boiling.
That's unchanging. Yeah, that's really.
Yeah. I think that's right, but again, and maybe this is my need to constantly be nuanced to the point of like madness. But I remember years ago I was involved in trying to raise awareness of the dangers of the Mel Gibson film, The Passion of the Christ, which was basically a passion play. Like, it was the exact same passion play that you might have reenacted on the streets of Eastern Europe, and then a bunch of like Cossacks with their, torches and pitchforks went and slaughtered a bunch of Jews. And so if you were watching that and you had any sense of history and you watch that film, you're like, holy crap, this is a passion film, just like they met. So I had watched it. I knew what we were in store for. And then I happened to watch it in the movie theater with a bunch of Christians, lots of Christians. And what hit me was that these Christians in America, most of them had no idea of the role of the Jew in that. They didn't even see the Jew. In other words, if now maybe in Latin America or in Eastern Europe, if they were to see the same film, they would have grabbed their pitchforks, but not in America because they had lost that view of the Jew in that way. Their Christianity had actually evolved. So I don't think everything's always stayed the same. Like I think the Jew is there and it's on the shelf and you can use them, but I do think it changes somewhat over time. And I think that's why we can be actors in history and we can help mold the way that people actually view us over time. It's not perfect and we're always there for the scapegoating, but it does shift.
So I want to get a little personal. Did you ever experience anti-Semitism personally?
Oh yeah. So it goes back to being a kid in Columbus, Ohio in the early in the 1980s. I went to an elementary school that was probably like 20% Jewish. It was mostly white. All of a sudden there was busing, and the busing came from two places. One were black areas, mostly inner city areas, and the other were these blue collar white kids who were coming in, who I had no experience with. And it wasn't the black kids who I experienced any anti-Semitism. It was these blue-collar white kids who like wrote swastikas in my book in high school and threw coins at my feet and stuff like that. You know, and they would take a bagel and throw it in the marching band and say, "Go get the bagel." And there was a lot of that going on, and then a lot of sort of bullying variety anti-Semitism. And so I experienced a ton of that growing up. But then I realized when I was in college, I was a pro-Israel activist at Ohio State. And I was, an anti-Semitism activist. And I started to see the radical black activists at Ohio State who brought in Stokely Carmichael or Kwame Ture, who was this radical black Pan-African nationalist who said that the only good Zionist is a dead Zionist. And he said that at Ohio State, and he was paid for by the Black Studies Department at Ohio State. And I'm like, wait a second, that's not what I experienced growing up. This is coming from a different set of actors in a different place. So I experienced that, and I certainly experienced Muslim anti-Semitism as well at Ohio State campus, being a pro-Israel activist. So I had experienced that other variant of anti-Semitism that you could see. And then, of course, by the way, here again, I write a book called Woke Anti-Semitism. I put news of it in various critical race theory, anti-critical race theory Facebook groups and the like, because those are the people who are going to buy my book, right? Yeah. In every single instance I did it, every single instance, one person or more said, "You Jews created wokeness in the first place, so stop whining about it." So again, you can see that even as I'm talking about one form of anti-Semitism that I don't think people really understand and need to understand, I'm still getting it from the other side. And there's a bit of a horseshoe, as we've described before, where the sides start to collide, where the idea of Jewish privilege is coming from both the right and the left simultaneously, and it's even feeding off of itself.
Yeah, well, I definitely see, you see it in the BDS protest. You see the Hezbollah supporters with like far right people hanging out. Absolutely. Again, the question is, where does it go? How does it end? What can we do about it? What do you do? What do you do to fight anti-Semitism?
Yeah, well, there's a few things. One, look, I buy your Jewish unity or Jewish pride argument. Like, I think those that
I didn't say pride. I said pride. We need to earn that pride. We haven't earned that pride yet. But unity, right. Yes.
I think there's a lot to be prideful about being part of this great Jewish people.
I don't think anyone else is doing what we're doing, and yeah, and that's exactly it. Nobody can comprehend what we're talking about. Who would even say that anti-Semites have anything valuable to say without saying we're anti-Semitic or we're self-hating Jews? But there's something that everybody's missing in this whole picture. And the reason why the solution is so close is because we're not waiting for anyone else to change. We're not waiting for the laws to be enacted. We're not waiting for a new politician to get elected. The answer is way closer than everybody thinks.
Like us, hit the bell thing on the YouTube so you can get a notification when the new episode is up. Well, this is the Jew Function, and let's get back to our guest.
I think there's a lot to be prideful about being part of this great Jewish people, and that's a source of unity. I mean, I think those things are not mutually exclusive concepts, but we could talk about that. But I think that there are things that we can do. Look, I've been in the coalition building business my entire professional life, and mostly building ties with those very progressive civil rights activists that we talked about, that I said had started to embrace an ideology that was inimical to our interests. What I'm realizing now is not that everyone has gone to that extent to the same degree, and there's still progressives we should talk to and friends we should make, but that our friends are people who oppose what is happening on both the far left and the far right. These are Chinese American leaders who don't want their kids' magnet schools to be taken over by radicals, right? Like, and who these are Indian American leaders who have the similar concerns and who are similarly situated in American society. These are Black heterodox thinkers who don't want their kids to be told that the system is rigged against them, even if the system is rigged against them in some cases. They believe in America, a pluralistic America that where you can have conversations with each other. They recognize intuitively, even if they can't say it in the way that I'm saying it, that whenever dogmas set in on the extreme right or extreme left, that we're all in trouble. And these people are starting to organize, and I think that there's a lot of relationships we can build. Right now, there's a version of ethnic studies that started in California that's spreading around the United States. And it treats Israel as a settler colonialist state. And it treats America as a settler colonialist state. And it's in major cities already in the United States, and it's spreading like wildfire. Who are our friends in stopping that? If it's only like a few white
What's that
dudes,
called?
It's called ethnic studies, or liberated ethnic studies. And I can share with you some of the curriculum materials. If people even wanted to see it now, I could probably even pull it up on my screen if we wanted. These are the most radical anti-Semitic voices on the left that are pushing this in school systems across the country. And I'm saying we need friends to fight that. We need friends. Unity, by the way, among ourselves is not enough. We need friends. We need unity with other groups who are similarly situated. We need it fast.
Are there Jews that are also part of this extreme left, or is everybody now, abandoning ship?
There's always Jews part of the extreme left. Yeah, of course. And there are Jews who are part of that movement that are pushing this along, that are, these are, and you could probably name the organizations that are involved with it. So of course there are Jews involved with that. Most of the Jewish community, however, knows this is a problem, but they're scared of alienating their progressive allies by opposing it. So they're sort of stuck. Like, oh my God, if we oppose this, we're going to make others angry with us. And so we should just try to modify it so we get the worst anti-Semitic stuff out and the negative portrayals out, and try to get them to please don't include Israel into this narrative. And some people will say, yeah, okay, of course, like they did in California. So they pass a version of this narrative that has the ideological framework in place, that of oppressed and oppressors. And yet it doesn't explicitly mention Israel, and the Jewish groups say, okay, we can go along with that. We'll go along with that. But then it becomes there are 4,000 school districts in California.
Yeah, but it sounds like you're just delaying the end to me. It doesn't sound.
Yeah, exactly. So what you have now is an ideological framework in place that is almost guaranteed to treat Israel as a settler colonial state, even if they say it won't. And it's spreading around the state of California in the 4,000 school districts. And we don't even know where they're adopting the more radical versions of this. Some cases, all of a sudden, you start to see the curricular material. Little Johnny brings home the text to mom, and mom is Jewish.
David, I'm a pretty simple guy. I live in a suburban town, a university town. My kids got a good public school education. They did Waldorf when they were younger. Kept them in a bubble when they were younger. They understand family. They did all of our holidays. They study, all those things. Them and all their friends listen to rap music. That's the music they listen to all the time. It didn't come from the home. It didn't come from like their school culture. It came from something in the society. So what I'm saying is, but I'm wondering, again, back to my emotional point, because this seems to me like the one place where maybe something can happen. It doesn't really matter of course it matters, but like the schools are doing all this, and this is what the curriculum is going to be, and but if there's something that feels good for them, something that gives them something with life energy in it, something that gives them something with camaraderie in it, then they gravitate to it, regardless of what they learned in their house and regardless of what they're doing in their school. That's why when Leo and I are talking about this unity concept, like, is it possible that there can be something that feels good, that seems right, that feels warm, that has camaraderie and connection in it, that you'll look at what they're teaching? And my kids, a lot of kids now, they understand that what's going on in school is a joke.
Is joke. Yeah, my kids too, by the way. Certainly my senior in high school son and my senior high school and stepson don't have like complaining about it. And yet what you said is absolutely right. Like it feels right to a lot of people. And so it must be right. It feels protective. It must be protective. Of course, neither of those things are true.
No, what I'm saying is regardless of what they're teaching in school. So for example, my kids are learning something in school, but they all get into rap music, which they're not learning in school.
There are other sources of culture. School is obviously one input. I do think it's a problem if schools embrace a curriculum that's crazy, because even if your kids and my kids who sat around a Shabbat dinner table and were taught to argue and question and everything else, even if they can question these things, a lot of kids won't. So you're taking something that might have at one time been confined to the humanities department at Brown University, and now you're scaling this throughout society. You're exposing kids have been in 8th grade and 12th grade and whatever. And I think that's dangerous.
Yeah. Okay. What now I hear you're talking about some step-by-step process of things get better. And actually it's true. Things were horrible in the past and things are, get better, and there's a lot of nuance to it.
Sure.
But at the end of the day, what we want is not just a step-by-step, over the next, 400 or 500 years, we'll make things better slowly through legislation and this, but we're looking for something to flip. We're looking for a real significant change. We're not satisfied with almost anything. So
I think things are getting worse, Seth. See, I think we're actually backtracking. I'm not claiming that. I mean, I think things have gotten better. I mean, Jews living in America today, any standard, are living much better than Jews almost at any point in history, even with anti-Semitism coming at us from different directions. But I'm worried that there could be a more general meltdown in society. Okay. I'm worried that the left is becoming crazier and the right is becoming crazier. And when the left gets crazier and the right gets crazier, Jews are more vulnerable.
Good. So I'm happy that we actually got into this, because, we're trying to get to a breaking point in our discussion, because I don't want to be in the place where things are, maybe we can go this way, we can that way. Rather, I want to see a trajectory, and what you're describing is a trajectory. It's getting worse, and I feel like we're a drop in the ocean. Even if you gather all the Jews. So, but I am asking what can be done, and you're saying, okay, let's be friends with the Chinese Americans, with the Indian Americans. Okay,
I think there are other things too. I was just getting going on that.
No, for sure. But even that, by the way, is not giving me a whole lot of comfort, because they're not. I don't know the numbers in the U.S. and if you look around the world, I'm afraid that the same pattern will repeat itself. If it doesn't end with America, then we will find ourselves having the same podcast in 100 years in India or in China. When the things are, once again, the Jews find themselves, opposed by the left, by the right. Yeah. I'm asking, how are we not able to change that? We're very smart people, the Jews. By the way, I didn't ask you the key question we ask a lot of our guests, like, how would you define a Jew? If an alien came from outer space, how would you define a Jew to them? By the way, I'll put a parentheses around it. Maybe.
Okay, let's do it. Yeah, let's come back to that, because I think that obviously that's a fascinating question. Look, I think that our lot as Jews is directly connected to the lot of the larger society. We are the canary in the coal mine. So if everything melts down, we melt down first.
True.
We become immediately vulnerable.
Yeah.
True.
And so to me, our role in Western societies is to be a voice of rationality and critical thinking, and to argue back against any ideology, whether it comes from the left or the right. Not settle with the oppressor binary because we don't want to even get a rawer deal than we already did. Not
David,
settle with crazy.
can we not fight I'm not talking about our day job. I'm just talking about like heart to heart right now for a second. Is it possible that we're not against anti-Semitism, we're against good connections between people?
In other words, let me just refine the question, because this is key for us. In other words, you're saying Jews have to somehow play a certain role in this. We have to play a certain role,
Yes.
that we, for one reason or another, we have been playing that role throughout history. We have been bringing the voice of reason, and also other things, not just reason. I think there's also a lot of heart in many places. We are the humanitarians, the ones who try to care for others. I mean, there's a lot of heart in it. It's not simply a rational thing to do. It's a human thing to do, right? So there's a certain role that we're trying to play here. So to Seth's question is, forget the anti-Semitism and all that, but how can we actually, become, the people who actually play that role, or as we call it, the function? How can we live up to that function in humanity? We also believe that there's a function for us, and we're not fulfilling it, and that is to us the key reason for everything, for all the craziness. We are not being the lighthouse in this storm.
Yes, that is my point.
Okay,
Absolutely.
good. All right, so
I'm not going to pretend that any of us can wave the wand of rationality or of heart and get people to go back to a degree being rational, being thoughtful, listening to each other, and so forth, and abandoning crazy ideas, whether it's from QAnon or whether it's neo-Marxist ideology or whatever. We can't. What we can do is be the lighthouse. And I think that should be our goal, because these forms of anti-Semitism, they're going to constantly emerge. It's going to be the endless game of whack-a-mole until we restore some rationality in society. So that's what I'm working on. Yeah.
Good. So okay. So now we can talk tachlis, as we say. So how do we do it? Because frankly, I look at what's happening in Israel. I don't see any of that. No rational, no heart. I see big craziness. I look at Jews in America, and we spoke to a lot of Jews over the years from many organizations. They don't often like to work together. Sometimes are even at odds with one another. Sometimes even to the point of actual, I don't want to say harming one another, but definitely, if I look back at the year on the eve of the Holocaust, the situation between the Orthodox Jews and the socialist Jews, and then the ones who were trying to assimilate, that was not good. They were not happy campers together. They were ratting each other out to the authorities. It was bad. People don't talk about it because it's like, oh, all the Jews suffered. No, but what happened before all the Jews suffered? Jews were at each other's throats, and I'm concerned. I see Jews at each other's throats here in Israel, and I see a lot of Jews also at each other's throats. Even there's a lot of disagreement, a lot of animosity. How do we take this tiny group, 8 million people on your side of the ocean, 8 million people here, and we actually make them be that role model? Can we do it? Can it be done?
I don't know. And it certainly can't be done with everybody. There's something called viewpoint diversity, ideological diversity. So we're going to have people always on extremes and everywhere in between. The question is, can we build back critical mass in the Jewish community of people who adhere to these basic ideas? One of my favorite phrases in Judaism is machloket l'shem shamayim, arguments for the sake of heaven. So it's not that we should stop having arguments. That's not what unity means. It's that we should have arguments for the sake of heaven, and we should restore some semblance of our ability to disagree agreeably with each other, and start to have the kind of moral conversations that elevate humanity rather than bring us down. And that's how I would judge things.
Imagine to see a group that disagrees and still treats each other respectfully. Imagine seeing a group that really disagrees with each other, but doesn't want to kill, it doesn't want to put out of the business, but somehow this is a huge ideal. This is a huge example that we can give.
The house of Hillel won out in the eyes of God, according to the story, because it first cited the house of Shammai's arguments before it made its own rulings. And that is a very powerful idea. So what if we try to emulate that in how we talk to each other? So if we disagree about something, I first steel man your argument. And you, one of my friends calls it star manning, even more powerful. I star man your argument. I say that here is what you were saying, and I give it real validity. And I'm not just trying to treat you as a straw man to rip down rhetorically. But and so when we're debating, we're actually debating the real ideas and the tensions between ideas. To me, that would become a model conversation for the rest of society. That's completely lost. It used to be, and I think that's what we should aspire to.
And the science of it, the kind of network science of it, it doesn't take a lot of people to start it.
Yes.
We just need, like you said, like a small critical mass. One guy came up with the concept for the iPhone, right? And the whole world is using it. Or one guy came up with Nike sneakers and the whole world is using it. So it wouldn't take that many of us to do this before it could just naturally spread through the system.
I think that's right. So what you would want to do in that case is to focus on Jews, not the entire society necessarily, but to spend a lot of time focusing on Jews who can disagree and can have constructive conversations and debates and the like, and try to turn that into a kind of viral social movement.
So you're a coalition builder, you said.
I'm a coalition builder, exactly. And the coalition here, if you're going to call it a coalition, or the product, if you want, there's different ways of looking at it, is something that's very central to Jewish tradition. It's not the only trend we've ever seen in Jewish tradition, but it's one that I think has deep roots in Jewish life, and that we should then take and try to perfect it ourselves and export it where we can. That's what I think the most important aspect. The most important thing we can ultimately do is get back to our own roots and play that role in society.
Okay, that's the headline of the whole show right there, Leo.
No, I was looking for a quote from an article by Baal HaSulam, Yehuda Ashlag, who wrote the commentary in the Book of Zohar, and we quote a lot from him because he was kind of like a revolutionary. He wasn't like a traditional Orthodox Jew. He was talking about things about taking this ideas and the wisdom and spreading it to everyone, religious and non-religious, and then to the whole world, red, white, yellow, black. He wrote to everyone, and he talks about the internality and externality of things, and he kind of says, look, there's internality and externality to everything in reality, everything in nature has internality and externality. A human has internality and externality. Society has internality and externality, and so the Jews have to be embody the internal quality of things, or at least even among the Jews, those who feel, as you said, who are ready to have the argument for the sake of heaven, and heaven being this ideal of love, unity, bestowal. That's what the creator in Jewish thinking is. It's not some grandfatherly personality, sending gifts and punishments. It's really a force of love and bestowal. And he said, if you are willing to unite for that, then if you prefer the internality of things to the externality, then also the other nations will prefer that, and everything else will kind of follow suit. But if we ourselves, the Jews, prefer the externality of things, the material aspect of things, and all the other gains of this world over the internality of things, over these higher values, then everything kind of falls apart. So he says it, and like I said, Jewish text says it in many, many places.
Yes.
How do we and
it's broken down before, by the way. At one point I heard this about how the House of Shammai actually killed a bunch of the House of Hillel. Like that infrastructure of discourse can easily be destroyed, and you have to really guard it. And maybe to some degree that's what's happening in Israel, that you have that it's not that the left-right divide has just gotten out of hand. It's that people stop being able to have the conversation in a way that would protect society from this.
It's not that we all have different opinions. That's not new.
Right. I've heard from a lot of people who are Israel's defenders. I'm not talking about leftist activists who said that they felt like after the election, the government, some elements of the government, not everyone in the government, saw that they wanted to vanquish the other side. They wanted to absolutely destroy the other side, like they were going to permanently put a stake through the left or to the center left in Israeli society. I think that those vanquishments, and whether that's the right analysis or not, we can talk about.
No. It's not a terrible analysis, and it's also very dangerous thing to do. By the way, I totally agree.
Because if you think that you're going to vanquish everybody, you're going to make the diversity go away because you finally won out, and now you're going to impose your vision on reality. That is a very dangerous mindset. When you see that, then you know the society is in trouble. And I think we're seeing that in the United States. I think we're seeing it in Canada. I think we're seeing it in the UK. I think we're seeing it in Israel.
Wow. Okay. So kind of a heavy note there. So are you an optimist or a pessimist?
I'm an optimist by nature. That's the funny thing. Like I do not like, being a preacher of doom, and I do think that there's scenarios in which larger forces can conspire to sort of change things in very rapid ways. When the printing press first came out, it created tremendous centrifugal forces in society. Everybody had their own newspaper, and they were basically gossip rags that people had to invade. But eventually, society sort of found its center of gravity and found sort of mediating forces at the center of society. Can we reconstitute some of those forces given these pressures from social media and elsewhere? Can we find our sea legs again? Maybe. I hope. I'm going to work toward that. But it feels very, very. It feels very, very sort of.
All right, so the Jew function. A lot of people ask, what is this, and who are we?
Are we anti-Semitic? Are we self-hating Jews? I heard that also.
We're like you. We're concerned citizens. We did our research, hours and hours and hours of research into historic patterns, into Jewish texts, and I mean a lot of Jewish texts, going all the way back to Abraham and other notable sages and Kabbalists, and all the way into the recent era. You'll be surprised how much amazing quotes exist about the need for Jews to unite. So that's why we're doing this podcast. Like us, hit the bell thing on the YouTube so you can get a notification when a new episode is up. Share it far and wide. Find something that you like. YouTube lets you cut clips. Share that clip with a loved one, with a Jewish friend, with a non-Jew who's like bothering you at work about something, and we're like, oh, that clip is exactly what I needed. Share it far and wide. Commenting is a great way to get a conversation going. And let's get back to our guest.
It feels very, very sort of, hard to imagine. Like I can't fashion all the solutions in my mind. So I think that then what you do in that situation is you say, okay, what can I control? Where can I, as a person, or where can we as a small group start to create some semblance of that, and so that we're part of the solution and we help accelerate those forces bringing us back together again.
There's something that is very, very, has a lot of gravity in what you said, and that is that there is, you said around the printing press, that these forces of nature kind of conspire, and we could see it many, many times. And also, we can look at the history of our people. It doesn't make sense that we would, that the Romans rose and fell, the Greeks rose and fell, the Egyptians rose and fell, the Persians rose and fell. There's some other force conspiring here. And then the other piece you said is, what can we do? Which part of it can we do? My takeaway here is that we build some group from all different sides, from the right and the left, but those ones that want to do, like, as you said before, we can disagree, but we can't, I don't remember how you described it, but not just pick anybody from the street, but you take even those with very, very opposite opinions, but that agree that we need to find some solution together, and that force, that natural force, that creator, that whatever, that X factor will help, for sure will help. That's kind of how
I think that's right. We have to construct those opportunities for re-engagement. I had this thought. I was talking to people on a podcast about America's schools and the fact that you have this sort of leftist narrative that believes America is pervasively white supremacist, and you probably have a right-wing narrative that America can do no wrong. And I said, what happens if you took 5 top educators who are maybe on the 30-yard line of woke, and another 5 who are on the 30-yard line of a more traditionalist view of American society, and you stuck them in a room for a week and had them sort of hash it out? Could you come up with an American narrative, more or less, that no one would like all, completely, but no one would hate either, and they could live with? And I think those are the kind of experiments of human engagement that we need to sort of do. Unless you could take the same and do it with Jews, can you and start to find areas of consensus and reestablish that middle ground in society whenever you can.
So before we close, we did say we can come back to the question. So if an alien came, how would you? And the alien saw all that attention on Jews. Like, what is a Jew? Who is a Jew? What defines a Jew as a Jew?
Yeah, look, there's the easy answers, of course, of like your Jewish parents or your mother or whatever. But I think that's a cop out a bit. And I think that. And by the way, I think even though I'm a Jewish people guy, right? Like that's how I fundamentally define myself. I'm not completely religious, even though I love the tradition. I don't necessarily buy the entire religious worldview around it. That said, so I'm a peoplehood guy, but I also know that the peoplehood is a bit of a myth too. Like in some ways, I might have more in common with the Latina evangelical living down the street than I do the Chassid living in Mea Shearim, like in some ways.
Right.
But we have a common destiny. We've had a common history. So let's accentuate that. We don't all have to be the same in order to have that thread of peoplehood to be the same. So an alien may not recognize it, but as someone who's lived it, as someone who aspires toward accentuating the bonds of peoplehood, I know what it is, and I love to work with others who have that vague sense of what it is and build on it, make it more real.
You know how we define a Jew? You know how we define a Jew? A Jew is anyone who has a desire for unity. Jew, Yehudi, from the word yichud, unification. So if you have that desire in you, that little point in the heart that kind of seeks that through whatever way, maybe through civil rights and human rights and justice but somehow it seeks that to bring things together. That's a Jew. For us.
Go for it.
I wonder if we can you can indulge us. I found this little excerpt about internality. If you can indulge us and read it for us. This is by Baal Sulam. I put it in the chat. I wonder if you hold on. Yeah, it's in the chat. If you can give it a read. It's from the introduction to the Book of Zohar, item 67.
Sure. When a person from Israel enhances and dignifies his internality, which is the Israel in him, over the externality, which are the nations of the world in him, that is, he dedicates the majority of his efforts to enhance and exalt his internality to benefit his soul, and gives little effort in the mere necessity to sustain the nations of the world in him, meaning the bodily needs. By so doing, he makes the children of Israel soar upward in internality and externality of the world as well, and the nations of the world, which are the externality, to recognize and acknowledge the value of the children of Israel. Interestingly, so by being his best self, the Jew being his best self, he models it for the rest of this world. In other words, the best form of external engagement is internal engagement.
Correct.
Which is, I think true, and still maybe I'm a bit of the cosmopolitan that's so deeply inbred in me. Is like, I don't know that I have to sort of completely buy that, and to say that, yes, become the best Jew you can by becoming the most moral person, the most unifying person you can, and at the same time, get to know your neighbors around you. Like, I don't think those two things have to.
No. But it's that. But that's what you do. You're a coalition person. You just said it yourself. Yeah. You're the definition of a Jew because you're trying to create coalitions. That's it. End the story. That's all it is.
I won't complicate it then. Let's let something beautiful stay beautiful.
Beautiful.
David Bernstein, what an incredible person. What a great thinker. What a person. I hope that people can hear what we're talking about, can think about these things, that everyone can keep their own opinions. We're not interested in making someone from the right become left or someone from the left become right, but how you spoke about it through the House of Hillel, that we can just hear each other, that we can try and be together and build something, and then have that extra force, that I forgot what you called it, that when you talked about the printing press, but that additional thing that will sweep through and bring us to good. And I really hope that we can see something good happen soon. We really appreciate you taking some time to talk to us.
Yeah,
Thank you.
And stay in our circle. We're building this circle. We're building this critical mass, one person at a time. So
Absolutely, be happy to.
nice, David. So
Thank you.
David, thank you so much to everyone watching. This is the Jew Function. You know what to do, and we'll see you here in our next episode. It's been a pleasure.
Take care, guys.
Take care, David. Have a great day.
You too.